The focus of our workshop today, planning for and using Swivl in your courses. I know we have students here too, so if you have other ideas of how your own professors and instructors have used Swivl in your courses, please feel free to share them with us as well. I'm Dr. Candace Hoppen. I'm in the special education department. I have started using Swivl now 3 semesters ago, so 2 falls, 2018, do the math. And I'm going to talk about how I've used it, what my journey was like getting into using Swivl, and then how I'm planning to use it in the future because I'm making changes every semester, and we'll talk more in a minute.
Yeah. And I'm Rachel Billman. I am an assistant professor in the special ed department as well. And I'm kind of on the other side of the spectrum from Candace, who's been using this for a few semesters now. I'm new to Towson. I learned about Swivl at the first Swivl workshop last semester and started using it right away. So it is doable. You can just start integrating this into your coursework right away, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well.
I've roped her into it as a first-year faculty. I'm like, hey, come present with me. So here's our focuses for today. You want to take that over?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about why to use Swivl, some examples of how we both use Swivl in our coursework, and then how to look at practice-based teaching and use that within your coursework, and then also how Swivl can help with that, and then how to plan to use Swivl and how to collaborate with others to use Swivl in your courses.
So why Swivl? So the reason, my why for Swivl started within our College of Ed. I had an opportunity to be what we call an HLP fellow. And so that's a high leverage practices when we're talking about like core practices in education and teaching practices. I was doing that and I found out I could have access from Debbie to this thing called Swivl, which I had never used before, but I could get a pro account and I could get accounts for all my students. So I figured I would sign up and then figure out if I wanted to use it or not and see how I would use it. So I ended up that semester building it into 3 different assignments and then loving it and kept building it into my course assignments. But it started with practicing the practices that we want our future educators to know. And the ease of Swivl and that focus on the HLPs and the core practices is kind of how I got to it. In addition, we all know there's teacher education standards that we have to focus on that are aligned to our courses, specifically in task and ISTE standards around mostly like evaluation, reflection, self-reflection, peer feedback, and then collaboration is another big component. I feel like Swivl and the use of Swivl and also modeling for our students how we can use Swivl ourselves as educators really aligns to these preparation standards. And then in addition, an added bonus is that EdTPA we know everyone's doing, and the recording, reflecting, and annotating, all of our students will have to do that in EdTPA. So why not give them the opportunity in advance to use a tool where they're doing the same thing so that this isn't the first time they're recording themselves, the first time they've uploaded a video, the first time they've done a video annotation or commenting or timestamps. So this is kind of the big why as well. And I already mentioned the HLP's core practices, but that practice-based teacher education, those pedagogies of how do we teach teachers how to do some of those core practices. And then for me too, my why, and I think Rachel's why as well, she just picked it right up, is the ease of use for the app. It's a simple concept, really. So what Swivl is, if you've been to the past workshops, it's essentially a recording system. They do have robots which can track you, so you could be hands-free recording yourself. That's what we have up on display. But as I was sharing earlier, I actually have never used the robots in any of my courses. I'm planning to this semester, but I've used it for 3 semesters now. I haven't used it. I've just used the Swivl app. It's a free app you can download on any device. You can get a free account if you want a pro account. Debbie can help you out. But we have a certain number of licenses for the college that we can use the pros, but really you can do a lot with the free accounts, which I know in one of the past workshops they discussed the difference between the free and the pro accounts, and there's so much you can do. So just the ease of use, that it's an app that anyone can get. Video sharing, my students do everything in Swivl. They're not ever having to record somewhere else, compress a file. I was talking to the students earlier, compress a file, re-upload, like rename, re-upload. They're not doing any of those steps. Before they leave my class, and really within 5 minutes after they've completed their recording, I already have it. So I can check I've got everyone's even before everyone's out the door. Storage, there technically are limits on storage, but it's really big. So I don't even know what the limit is. I've never run into an issue. I have tons of videos in my account at this point. And then the online accounts are super easy to maneuver. I mean, the app is very user-friendly as far as the interface, and then the online accounts, once you're just from your own device or desktop, very easy to use. And so I think that for me, having never used it before, having this kind of purpose and focus on building HLP work purposely in my courses, Swivl was like, well, why not? Let's try this. Yeah. All right, take it over.
Okay, so we've used Swivl in a number of ways in our courses. I'll let Candace talk a little bit about how she's used it in her classes, but for me specifically, I've used it in like scenarios. So I've presented scenarios to my students, and I wanted them to record themselves kind of talking out through these scenarios, especially when we were talking about holding IEP meetings in special education. Now I have special education majors and gen ed majors in my classes, but everyone's going to be interacting with parents and students in some way, shape, or form in the future. So I wanted to really make sure that they were having that practice time to talk through some difficult scenarios that could arise in education. But instead of having to do some elaborate Swivl, not that Swivl's difficult, but some elaborate Swivl activity, what I really had them do is look at Swivl and record through Swivl the scenario, them reacting to the scenario, them talking through it, and then they uploaded their videos into Blackboard, which is a little bit different from what Candace will show you here in a minute. So I'm just going to quickly, do that for me. Yeah. Thank you. And here is my Blackboard thread. So what I did is I just created a discussion board. And what they can do after they record their video in Swivl, they can take that link and they can post it in a discussion board, which is pretty simple. And then from there, this video's right here. I'll pull it up. I'm not going to show it to you guys, but you can just kind of see how it just pops right up. And then people can provide feedback. And what I had them do, had them do some self-reflection. They did self-reflection in a writing assignment in class, but I could take a look at it. All the videos were there for their classmates to see, so they could see how other students would react to a scenario and how they kind of manage those behaviors or whatever the scenario was presenting. So just real quick, if you click and put the link right here, just pops right up. So you can see the video, it pops right up. It's not like some long loading thing, it's just really seamless. And that's without having to go to the Swivl app itself in the classroom. So you're not like relying on that, you can just integrate everything through Blackboard.
I think, just to jump in real quick, that's an important distinction too, is that you can, from the basic accounts, you can take, there's multiple options of how to share your video. If you share it via a public link, you could share that with anyone. So you could, our students, our teacher candidates could share this with their mentor teachers who have no association with Towson. They can share it in their Blackboard site with whoever has access to the Blackboard site. You could really share it multiple ways. They could upload it into TK20. Like, there's multiple ways they could use that. It's just a matter of knowing which way to share. And I think that's an important distinction, different from sharing within the app, which is what I do mostly. But this would allow multiple people to then access that video.
Yep. And this is also a little bit different because what you're doing is you're staying within the free account. So a lot of students might not have access to the pro accounts, which cost money. And what they can do is just take the link and then they can provide feedback within a discussion board in Blackboard rather than using the pro account. So it's kind of like a bypass or a workaround without having to use a pro account there. So my entire course, or all of my classes did this for this one particular assignment, and they were able to provide feedback to one another, and then I was able to go in and see their reactions without having to do it in real time in the classroom.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've used it. And similar to having students record themselves doing something, teaching something. So my first course I implemented it into is this XE429, which has a social emotional competence and behavioral management focus. And what I had students do, I picked one of the HLPs for the college, which is around building respectful relationships with students. And one of the ways that, there are a million ways to build a successful or respectful relationships, but one of the ways that I had my students kind of purposely focus in on is having what we called small conversations. These are just names of the assignments, so don't get hung up on that. But essentially how to have, looking at their language when they talk to their students and all those other times of the day. So what are those things? How do we make sure that we're communicating to our students that we care about them, we respect their voice, and build a relationship? So I actually had them do practice small conversations in our class. What I did first is I rehearsed small conversation with the student myself. And these are small non-academic conversations. And I had a colleague actually come in and we did it kind of like a fishbowl. I used Swivl to record myself so that I could see it, and then I can also use it in future classes for me, but also so students weren't there, they could see it as well. But I did a rehearsal, and then I had students do their own rehearsals, record with Swivl, one of the people's in their group, and then they shared those videos to me. And we all were analyzing our videos for look for. So what did you see that I and my colleague Carla did during our rehearsal of a small conversation? And then now let's rewatch in your small groups your recordings and talk about the look fors. So that was less formal, but we had a video to rewatch and reflect on. I then had them take that a couple of steps further, where they then were having small conversations with real students, and they were then also annotating and taking the text and from the conversation. So they had the recording. They also then go through and transcribe those conversations. They're short. They're maybe 3 minutes max with a student. And then they're also doing annotations of that. So I use the video plus some writing and reflecting built into that assignment. My management demonstrations, just my name for the assignment, but I built those into my behavior management courses, and I did kind of multiple rounds. So we started similar to the small conversations, doing rehearsals together, but my purpose was twofold. So they had to model and teach something, a practice, a routine, a procedure for their classroom. And then they also, as we did more rounds of management demonstrations and recordings, I would also have students who were kind of planted, who were exhibiting some kind of behavior they had to address as well. So I was looking at my look fors in the videos as they were reflecting and as I was giving them feedback, were on how are you modeling the components of this lesson, this task, this procedure, and then also how are they managing the behaviors, or were they not? So those I did kind of in multiple phases, where the small conversations, my trajectory is a little bit different. But each one, there was reflection, there were multiple viewings of their videos, and they were also sharing them with peers too, in class and outside of class, to get feedback. I did all of this within the Swivl account, and I had accounts set up for each of my classes at the start, so they have a pro account, and then they get the free account towards the end, just so that we can have enough licenses for the students who really need the pro features. But my students, I essentially had like a how-to bulleted list that I shared with them. It is kind of the basics to get in, and they were using it within 5 minutes in my course, and then we continued using it throughout. So again, that kind of ease of use and that kind of just for me and for the students. So that's a lot of ideas, but then what Rachel and I have also talked about is using this for our own practice. So I was doing some rehearsal and recording to share with my students, but we've also talked about recording using the robots. This is my plan now, recording myself, because just from an accessibility standpoint for students who can't attend, or if I'm like, what did I say, or a student who was there but zoned out or had an emergency, it's all recorded there, so we're capturing our own teaching, and then I have it to look back on myself. So if anyone's used Panopto, it's a similar idea, right, where it would be like built into the classroom. But Swivl, the great thing is our students all have accounts, so they can easily see it. I can easily share that link. So again, coming back to that usability, the functionality of it, I think makes it a really strong tool for the students, but also for ourselves as far as reflection.
Yeah, and I do highly recommend recording yourself and watching yourself teach. It is incredibly uncomfortable, and you're gonna be like, oh, I don't like this. But it's one of the most transformational things I think I've encountered in my teaching practice. So we've been talking about this a lot. It's going to be like a small goal for me this semester, just to continue to reflect on the teaching practices. Yeah.
And I think, again, as we're talking about those core practices, right, we're modeling that for our students too. Like, I'm using this tool. Here's how I'm using it for myself to self-reflect, and I'm asking you to do it through these multiple assignments or these multiple in-class and out-of-class opportunities. So again, it really is a simple tool, but the use and how you use it and the functionality, I think, is what makes it really powerful. So now that you have heard some ideas about Swivl, I mentioned HLPs and core practices when I initially started, kind of as my why for what made me jump right into Swivl. You have a handout with you, and it's a couple of pages. You don't need to read it, but or not right now. Please read it later. But you have this same visual up here is what is up on our slides. And then there's also a planning sheet on the back. So the thought is that you may not have to do this, or not yet necessarily, but we know that there's value in teaching and giving our students practice in the things that we want them to be able to do, right? Like, we know just telling them how to do things rather than having them do the things and now with Swivl, record, reflect on, and improve those practices, we know that can be powerful and that can just level up our own teaching. So the references are here, but McDonald, Kazemi, and Kavanaugh proposed essentially a 4-phase planning cycle around core teaching practices. And so I've done this, quite honestly. I started unintentionally doing this, but then I found out about the cycle and I was like, oh, this is what I'm doing, and here's my tips and guide for how I can continue doing this as I build in more to my other coursework. But starting to make sure that you're deliberate about how you break down, like how do we teach the teacher to teach this way, that you're giving them multiple opportunities to practice it, and that you're providing, in as much as possible, authentic settings and authentic scenarios. So my one assignment, I do have them. They have a placement paired up. They do get permission to go record with one student. So that's very authentic. It's a real kid they've already started to build a relationship with. My management demonstrations, I have them do them with their peers. So my teacher candidates are the students for themselves as well. So depending on access to students, permissions, confidentiality, may depend. But I do feel like I'm going through this cycle with each of those assignments. So you have the handout that details each one, but essentially how are we breaking up and introducing that practice, and how could Swivl help us do that? How are we going to prepare and rehearse ourselves and our students? How could Swivl help us do that? How will students then actually enact and do the practice, again with real students or themselves as peers pretending to be the students, or not pretending, but practicing to be the students? And then how will they analyze and reflect on that? What will they do? And again, how can Swivl help? I feel like Swivl has supported me in each phase, and that's what we're hoping kind of for our last chunk to allow you all to do.
All right, so after we're done here, we're going to have you guys sit and really think through how you could integrate this into your coursework for this semester. So in order to do that, first we would recommend that you identify just a course that you plan on perhaps using Swivl within. So start with just a course, and then think about an HLP teaching practice that could be related to that specific course. So maybe you're thinking about something right now. And then we're going to use that 4-phase learning tool that Candace just went over. So we're going to think about how we're going to integrate and embed the practice into our class sessions. We're going to think about where we could use Swivl and how it's going to support learning for our teacher candidates. And then we're going to follow this 4-step process. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So our hope is that you have a little bit of background, you have some ideas now. You can also go ahead and download the app, start kind of playing with it to see as far as usability, functionality. But the hope is, now that we're a couple weeks out from the start of the semester, how could you use this planning tool, plus what you know now about Swivl? And what I've listed are ideas for each step on how I've used Swivl or how you could to help support. So when you're thinking about how do I introduce a core teaching practice to my teachers, it often helps for them to see it. So I, thankfully now, have multiple Swivl videos of my students doing these things that I want my now current students to do. So I use my old videos to show them, and we do our own analysis and look-fors to figure out, oh, okay, so this is a really strong, small conversation. Here's one that's less respectful or less supportive. And we do a lot of that, so they really understand the components of it. And Swivl and just the videos and having those has helped me a lot. And then how will they prepare and rehearse the practice? So I mentioned this a little bit already. I've done my own rehearsals, recording them and showing the students, then asking them to rehearse themselves. And they're using Swivl in those moments too. That's when they're actually using it the first time on their own. And then re-watching right there what I just did. Their peers are going around giving them that feedback so that they're focused on those look-fors that we wanted them to do. And now they're getting that self-reflection opportunity plus the peer feedback reflection. And then feedback from me as well once they share them to me. And then how can they enact it with students? So this takes you determining, so what's your access to real students, or are the teacher candidates going to be the students for each other? So how will that happen? But this would be like the final, they'll continue doing it when they're educators, but the final step of the really doing it. We know, we've practiced, we've rehearsed, we've prepared, and here's my enactment, okay? My performance with real students. And I've used Swivl, so I've had these students take Swivl, go and record. I've also had them record those management demonstrations where they use themselves, multiple rounds of the management demonstrations. So with more challenging behavior and kind of everyday behaviors that I kind of planted in their mini teachings. And then the final step of that 4-phase process is the analysis. So I did my enactment, It's so much easier to analyze that when I have video evidence. It's also easier to, well, I should say harder to deny that you did or didn't do things because you have that video evidence. So my students are then looking at the video saying at this point, they can actually do it in the annotation within Swivl. They can put the timestamps in their write-ups for me. Again, we're all connecting back to EdTPA, which we mentioned at the beginning. We've got to be able to analyze our own work. And they're rewatching, reviewing, and really in depth saying, like, here's those things that I was supposed to be trying to do that I had practiced and rehearsed, and here's where I did them. Or here's where I didn't do them. Or here's where I wish I would have said at minute 20, a follow-up to my student, and I missed that opportunity. So we're using that in every phase, essentially. I feel like Swivl has helped me. So for you all, you have that planning tool. On the back is a graphic. It's just a simple cycle. We're hoping, and we would like to be resources, we're here to be resources for you, that you can kind of walk through this process. And many of you might just be in the how do I introduce stage, or even maybe in the number 2 stage right now, because there's a lot to kind of consider. But in addition to that, how could you use the cycle? Think about what are the next steps, like right after this today. What are the next steps you need to do to start using Swivl? Do you need to set up an account yourself? Do you need to get it loaded on all those iPads that you use in your whatever class? Get it on your own devices, play with it, make sure that you have your own, like if your students are setting it up, Debbie or whoever your contact is, she's for our College of Ed, helping you get the student account set up, just what's going to help you get it off the ground and using it. Or do you just want to start this semester by borrowing a robot and recording yourself a couple of times and seeing like, oh, that's a cool functionality just to have for my own self-reflection. There's a lot of ways to use it. Again, a seemingly simple tool, but like the usability and functionality, I think, makes it really strong. So that's where we want to leave you with some workshop time. And Rachel and I are here to answer questions, help out, show you where the app is, and then ask us any questions you have.